Greetings, this is Management 570. This lecture is going to be on performance management, specifically how do appraisals help us manage employees, particularly how we go about the process of doing performance appraisals, providing feedback for our employees, and helping in the design process of managing performance appraisals. We also deal with compensation and how we can use compensation, specifically pay for performance programs, to have an impact on employee performance or reward them for past performance. And lastly, the issues of discipline. While discipline issues can be addressed in your annual performance appraisal, it's not limited to that. And in fact, discipline is something that we need to be doing every single day. This is an important part of coaching, learning how to handle disciplinary problems and to give employees the appropriate feedback on those issues. So we will continue with our material. So what specifically is performance management? This is the umbrella term that we use for managing all kinds of output from our employees. It's whatever policies and practices we use to manage that. Appraisal is at the center of it all. The performance appraisal is something that is designed with the help of the human resource function, and then the manager is the one that has to assess and provide the feedback to the employee on the quality of their performance, whatever performance elements we're speaking of. The outputs from performance appraisal, there's a few of them. Number one, the issue of compensation and how pay for performance addresses the issue of giving rewards for employees for good past performance or creating incentives for future performance. But the whole goal of the compensation plan, a pay for performance plan, is how management then can use compensation to reward their employees. Training and development is the other aspect. With training and development, what we're doing is taking what we've learned about an employee's current performance and then making a decision to help them to develop better skills, whether it's for the current job they're in or whether we are preparing them for future job opportunities through the development process. So our performance appraisal is a key input for determining what kind of training or developmental tools the employee needs in order to be able to be a good performer. Lastly, is the issue of discipline. And I used a dotted line here with respect to the issue of discipline because with discipline, obviously the performance appraisal is a good place to deal with disciplinary issues if we have a sort of a low-level problem with discipline issues and it's a theme over the year. But discipline isn't just limited to your performance appraisal process. Discipline should happen in the moment as things come up. So if someone comes in late and they're consistently late, you can deal with that disciplinary issue then, but you can use a progressive disciplinary procedure that might be reinforced through your performance appraisal process, where we can say, you've had problems with attendance or you've had problems with coming in late. It's an intermittent problem. We need to address this. We're giving you lower feedback. We're giving you feedback, but it's a lower assessment of your performance because this is a problem you haven't dealt with. So we can use multiple levels of tools to help us to show the link between disciplinary procedures and employee performance to make sure that our employees are following our rules, following our guidelines, following our policies, that they're showing up on time and doing the things that we expect of them. So in terms of the purpose, the overall purpose of performance appraisals, there's a twofold purpose here. On the plus side, we have the developmental tools. That's actually the one at the bottom. And that's, we use the developmental side of performance appraisals to, as I said, give them feedback for how we can improve their performance over time. The goal here is not to punish people, but to think about how we can improve them through goal setting and over the next year or so. So the evaluative side, however, is more about the compensation and promotion issues, right? It's about reward and punishment. I get rewarded with a raise or get rewarded with a promotion if I do a good job in my performance appraisal, or I could be could get no raise or no longer be eligible for the promotion, or I could get demoted if my performance isn't up to snuff. the tie-in with the developmental is that we want to have your performance appraisal to be both dimensions. We want it to have an evaluative dimension. We want it to have a developmental dimension. And not a lot of companies engage in the developmental side of things, but it's important that we do. So what we want is to assess people, to set the goals, and do the training and coaching and mentoring. And then in a separate meeting, work with them more specifically on this is the reward you're going to get, or this is the pay increase you're expecting to see, and this is how you are getting ready for a promotion. The tie-in between the two, obviously, is that the promotion is usually linked to a developmental plan that's been going on for a while in terms of that feedback. And if the feedback's been good and the person has been developing, as one would expect, that can then be used as a reward down the line. So you can see how those two things are tied together. In terms of performance dimensions, we need to consider a whole lot of different factors. First of all, we need to think about the task performance itself, exactly the tasks that we want people to perform. And that's an important part of thinking about performance, but it's also the contextual factors, right? The larger competencies that we want our employees to use. For example, are we going to reward them for what we call pro-social behaviors or citizenship behaviors? Going the extra mile to get a project done, or, coming in on a weekend if there's a problem and something needs to be addressed. You wouldn't consider someone who leaves at 5 o'clock, never takes a phone call, and never makes themselves available for on-call concerns as someone who's engaging in citizenship or pro-social behaviors. And that's not to say that someone should have their private life invaded all the time. That's not appropriate. But if you're a manager and you're managing a staff of employees, and if there are things going on over the weekend or in the evenings, sometimes you're going to have to respond to those things. That's the whole point of being a salaried manager, is that you're expected to make yourself available if a problem comes up. It doesn't mean that you should be calling your employees every day and saying, oh, you need to be working until 10 o'clock at night, or, let's talk about this project. You have to learn boundaries. But good pro-social behaviors in terms of performance is knowing that people, if you say, hey, I need you to put a little extra work into this project, people are willing to do that. And they're willing to do what it takes to get something done. It isn't just the tasks that people do, but it's the workplace attitudes and the behaviors and the citizenship ideals that they bring to the table that work hand in hand with the actual tasks they have to perform. And that's the stuff that we would need to consider. Task performance is about the things that we do to transform the raw materials, right? Whether it's knowledge coming in and then we create a product or service for somebody, or whether we take, a piece of raw material like a piece of wood or metal, and then we recreate that into something usable that we sell to our clients. And the goal is that the tasks that we do help us with the transformation of something from raw material to something usable. So we need to replenish those raw materials, we need to distribute raw materials, we need to provide support for all those cores of things. So these are the kinds of task performance issues that we need to be considering. So anything that we do that directly affects our job, that is helping us to transform raw materials or information and to make it usable, is considered part of our task performance. Contextual performance are, again, the things that contribute to the organization's effectiveness or to an environment that really helps the company to be successful. And that's about being on time, doing extra effort, making constructive suggestions to things, being helpful to colleagues rather than withholding information, making sure you follow the rules, you're a good follower based on some of the information we've talked about in other lectures, that you're loyal to the company, and of course the expectation is that the company is loyal to you in that exchange. But nonetheless, that's the kinds of things that the company is looking for in terms of contextual performance. What's the difference between the task and contextual performance? Task performance is unique to a particular job, and every job has a unique set of tasks that need to be accomplished, and it's very role prescribed. So I have a role in this company, I do this particular task, and that's unique to my job and to this particular company. And how do we assess that? We assess that through my KSAs, my knowledge, skills, and abilities, and how those knowledge, skills, and abilities need to be in alignment with the tasks that is required on the job. So going back to our discussion on, job descriptions and the discussion on how do we hire people when we know that their knowledge, skill, and abilities matches the knowledge, skills, and abilities required to do the tasks of the job. And so when those things match up, then we are looking at the aspects of task performance. Contextual performance is stuff that it will cut across all sorts of different jobs. It's not unique to one particular job or one particular role, but we want our employees to show up on time. We need our employees to not fight. We need our employees to communicate with each other. We need our employees to do, work overtime on occasion to get a project done. So those kinds of things, the competencies that we bring to the table in terms of our citizenship and our conscientiousness and things like that are part of the context, making sure that the context is conducive to getting work done. And so our personalities really influence this. So when we think about task performance, that goes back to in the hiring process, we were talking about the person-job match, right? Task performance is matching the person and their skills to the job and what is required to perform the tasks for that job. So that's the person-job match. Contextual performance is whether or not the attitudes or behaviors and values that the person brings to the table are going to match with the company culture and the company environment. And so our personality, that's person-organization match. And it's the personality that we're looking at to see whether or not these things would work together. So when we think about performance criteria, there's a large process that we have to engage in order to be able to develop good performance criteria, and it's not simple. And I think a big mistake that a lot of employers make or a lot of managers make is they say, well, I need you to sell. So let's go out there and sell, sell, sell. So what you're doing is you're telling someone to put blinders on and only focus on selling as many things as they can. Think about what happened with Wells Fargo. Their manager said, I need you to sell these instruments, sell them hard, sell them fast, whatever it takes, get this done. And what they ended up with is people who put on blinders, who only looked at how can I improve, how can I have sales numbers that look really good, how can I improve my sales numbers, and they engaged in illegal and unethical behaviors in order to meet that narrow requirement that management had them focus on. So it's really important, when you're giving guidelines to people on performance, you're not just talking about a task, one task, but a variety of tasks and a variety of behaviors that you expect people to behave in order to accomplish their job. So a better approach for Wells Fargo would have been, we would like to see an improvement in sales of these particular instruments. And let's set reasonable goals and see how well people respond to this. Let's talk about sales tactics. We want to make sure not only do we see this improvement in sales, but we don't have more customer complaints that they feel like they're trying to be sold something that they don't really want to do. So that might have been a better approach to things. So how do we then go about thinking about and developing performance criteria? Because as managers, we may play a role, and we should be playing a role in how we are evaluating our employees and the kinds of performance measures we want to assess them against. So the first thing you want to think about is this issue of a single measure versus multiple measures. A single measure is typically inappropriate except in the most narrow of circumstances, which, for example, if you are going to be a ditch digger and your job is to dig ditches, and that's the only thing you do all day, nobody expects anything different from you but just to dig ditches, then the performance criteria that you need to be assessed on is how well you dig ditches, period. Most of the time, though, jobs are far more complex than that, and it really requires multiple measures. And let's go back to the sales example. In the sales example, we have employees needing to do sales, but it's not just about churning sales. It's also about good customer service and making sure we're not putting too much undue pressure on our customers and making sure we're not engaging in misrepresentation, making sure we do feedback. So there's a whole lot of factors that go into sales, and it's not just about turning the sales numbers, and putting blinders on someone and only having them focus on getting as many sales as they can. So we want to balance multiple measures and the different kinds of behaviors that we want people to engage in. Sales, sure, but also honesty in the way that they deal with their customers, and making sure that the goals are set reasonably and all those sorts of things. So our better bet is to go with multiple measures that deal with different aspects of performance and not a single idea of what performance is, because performance is multidimensional. When you deal, though, with multidimensional aspects of performance, you have to deal with things like contamination and deficiency, right? When we are contaminating a measure, it means that we have things included in the measure that really shouldn't be there. For example, I might assess a sales rep's performance based on how attractive they are. Sorry, but that's not something that anybody can control, first of all. And we're not talking about professionalism and how they're dressed professionally. I'm talking about attractiveness, like on a scale of, that person's a 10 or that person's a 5, whatever you want to say. What we're really talking about is, obviously professionalism, but how cute or pretty or attractive somebody is has nothing to do with their performance as a sales rep. You don't have to be, quote unquote, a conventionally attractive person in order to be able to do a good job in sales. So that would be a contaminated measure. We're bringing something in that's really not relevant to assessing performance. Another aspect that we could look at is deficiency and having a deficient measure. And a deficient measure is sort of the opposite of contamination, whereas a measure is contaminated with irrelevant information. A deficient measure means it's missing something. So if you're looking at sales and you only focus on the quantity of sales and how many numbers people put on the board, and you're not focusing on the quality of the customer service that the client gets, then you have a deficient measure. So you need to include not only the sales numbers, but also the customer service and the other aspects of sales that are important to the company and important to you. So we want to make sure when we use multiple measures in our performance that they're not contaminated with things that are irrelevant and that they include all aspects of performance that are important to us. So that's how we have to balance that. Next, when we're doing our performance measures, we have to think of, so how are we going to assess them? Are we going to compare them to a standard? This is a certain standard we set goals and we have to compare to that standard, or are we going to compare them to somebody else, like a ranking system? And what we have found in the courts, generally speaking, is that comparison systems or relative systems where we're comparing one employee to another are really not appropriate measures for performance, and they usually don't stand up in court. The goal should be to set a standard that anybody can accomplish, and the challenge is, you don't want employees competing against each other in a way that's unhealthy, and that can easily happen when we have them pitted against each other. A friendly rivalry is one thing, right? Having a small competition, who can get the most sales, something along that line, or who can have the best customer service, record. Again, that's completely fine too. But when we're talking about in the end is, you're ranked number one, you're the best employee, every employee after that is going to be gunning for them and doing what they can to make them unsuccessful. It has a backwards effect. People assume that means when they set up these relative scales, they assume that means the employee is suddenly going to be better and compete, harder in order to win. And most of the time what you end up finding is it's not that they want to compete harder, it's that they want to sabotage the person who's ahead so they can rise to the top. And a great example of this is what happened to a friend of mine in law school. At a time before you had access to the internet to be able to do a lot of your research, you had to use the library, and there was one set of books in order to be able to do some of your legal research. And so in a legal writing class that my friend was in, they assigned them a case that they needed to research and then write something up for the case. And so the case was on record, and everybody had to go to the library, make their photocopy of it, and access that case. Well, the first people who went to the book razored out the pages of the case. And anybody else who went to look for the case, it was missing. Now, you would say, well, you could go complain. Sure. But Law school grades on a curve. It grades on a relative scale. The top 10% get an A, the next 10% get a B, and on down the line. So if you're in a situation where you're competing against other people for the top grade, sabotage becomes the natural reaction that many people have. And so what happened was, other people couldn't complete the legal writing assignment, and by definition, they didn't get the good grade. Ultimately, that was fixed. The perpetrators were handled appropriately. But, in those initial moments, what they've done is created a system that says it's okay to sabotage somebody else so that you can rise to the top rather than rising to the top on your own merits. People are less likely to do that and much more likely to engage in the sabotage. So it's really important to consider that. So what's the best option? Setting the standards. Setting goal standards, setting standards across the organization for what we think is important for every employee and what's particularly important for you based on the goals we need to set for you, and then judge you against those goals. And so if you've accomplished your goals, you've been successful. Next, what will you measure and basically what's important? So we'll think about traits versus behaviors versus outcomes. And we'll talk in a few minutes about the difference between those three, but and how we can use them. But basically, traits are the characteristics that one has coming in. And the challenge with characteristics is that the bottom line is people can't really change some of their basic characteristics. I can't change my personality rapidly enough in a performance appraisal context to improve. So telling someone that they've got great traits is a nice thing, but that's something that you need to handle in the hiring process. It's not really part of the performance appraisal process. If they have certain traits, that's great. And if they don't have it, they're not going to get them suddenly. So you deal with traits on the hiring end of things, and then you really need to focus then on behaviors and outcomes when you're dealing with the performance appraisal process. And what we have found, again, is that the courts don't support, just like the relative scales where we compare people against each other, they don't really support trait-based appraisals the same way. They think that they are flawed in many contexts. And so the best option for any organization is to really focus on behaviors and outcomes and making sure that the behaviors and outcomes are important. Lastly is that the whole idea of who's going to do the assessment. Most of the time, the employee and the superior are engaged in that process, but depending on the person's job, they may have peers if they work on a team, or subordinates if they're a boss to people, or customers assess them if they work with customers, or all of them for that matter, depending on what they use. The goal is that we want to have a rich perspective on all aspects of your performance so that I can really focus on with each individual assessor, am I doing what it takes for my employees? Am I a good manager to my employees? Well, my customers can't assess that. My boss may not be able to assess that, but my subordinates, my employees, absolutely can assess that. But my superior, my boss, can assess what I do with them, and my customers can assess what I do with them. So the goal here is that if I have a multidimensional aspect of my performance and I am accountable to a lot of different people, I need feedback from those people, not just one person, but feedback from all those people to give me a sense of how well I'm performing in all those areas. The challenge with doing a 360-degree feedback, or something that's as broad and comprehensive as that, is that it takes a lot of training to do this, and time and money. And a lot of companies don't want to engage in the time and money aspect. So most of the time what you'll find is, unless peer evaluation and team-based work is really important for certain kinds of employees, most of the time for employees it would be a self-evaluation, and my boss, superior, will evaluate me. And if I have employees, I might get feedback from some of my employees, depending on what the expectations are in terms of the organization and the culture of the organization. So those are the different aspects of performance that we need to consider. So here is how we relate to performance in context and what is considered trait, behavior, and result. A performer and the the traits, the characteristics of the performer is part of traits. And so what we're doing in doing a trait-based assessment, which we shouldn't be doing because of legal reasons, but many companies still do, they're looking at the performer, his or herself, and their characteristics, right? So we look at those characteristics in a given situation, and then we can assess their behaviors through a behavioral approach, or we assess the outcomes based on an outcome-based approach. A lot of times, if we know that outcomes are going to happen fairly rapidly and they're easy to see, and we have a lot of data points, we use outcome-based evaluations to assess people. But when outcomes are maybe long-term, like I might start working on a project, but that project might not complete for 3 years, then you're going to be assessing me on the behaviors that I used during that process. So you can't really gauge me on outcomes because the outcome is long-term. It's going to happen a long time from now. But when I have short-term projects, things that can happen daily, weekly, monthly, hourly, whatever, then we use a results-based approach. That's the better approach to it. So again, as it says here, the trait approach, the behavior approach, the results approach, they all emphasize slightly different things. The trait approach is really focusing mostly, when companies use it, they focus mostly on the cognitive abilities and the personality characteristics. And again, as I said, the big concern that I have with this is people can't change their cognitive abilities and their personalities in a rapid enough time with appropriate feedback to make it a relevant factor to consider in performance appraisal. You assess for cognitive abilities and personality in the hiring process. And then when we know that we've assessed people and they have those cognitive abilities and personalities, then we turn around and we should assess them on the behaviors and on the outcomes that we expect of them. So you only really use your trait-based approach if we expect some real clear changes in the organization. And again, because there's so many changes, what we want to assess is, does a person have the resilience to get through that process, particularly as they're going through all these changes. But the big problem, as I've said, is that it's really hard to improve on personality and cognitive ability. So you may not get the behaviors and results that you want if all you're focusing in is the traits. You want to make sure when you are hiring that you've established that these are the traits that lead to these behaviors and results, right? That's part of that whole, why do I select this selection tool versus that selection tool? We begin, with figuring out these are the behaviors that we want to see. This is the cognitive abilities or the personality that I would expect somebody to have in order to be able to perform the way that we want with the right behaviors and results. So stay away, as I said, I'll reinforce once more, stay away from that trait-based approach. Use your traits in the hiring process. Make sure you've got those assessed appropriately, and then use outcomes and behaviors when you do the annual assessment for feedback. So the behavior approach, as it says here, is more appropriate when, as I said, there's a long time to achieve your outcomes, when there is a good link between behaviors and results. I'm sorry, I apologize. When the link between behavior and results is not always obvious because we don't have the results in front of us easily. So the outcomes, when they're further off, as I said, are a problem. And we also want to be careful too if we know that we're assessing someone on results that they have no control over, right? I mean, when you have a direct impact on the assembly line, right, I can assess you on the results of your work on the assembly line. But when I do work and it's contingent upon other people doing what they're supposed to do and the result doesn't happen, I can't evaluate you on results when you don't have full control over your results, right? So your better approach then is to use the behavior-based approach. The results approach is really also a good option, again, as we've talked about, when your data isn't readily available, whether it's minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, quarters, if we have results that we know we can see fairly regularly and very obviously. The results-based approach is much easier to do than a behavior approach, because behavior approach requires you to take the time and to observe your employees and to be staying on top of some of their performance issues. It's also lower cost, because if it's less time, it's less cost. And data tends to be sort of objective. I mean, if I'm going to evaluate you on sales and customer service, those are objective numbers that I can get pretty readily. It's appropriate, again, to use results when we already assume that workers are skilled in the necessary behaviors. Okay, when we know that they're trained well, we're not worried about managing the process and the behaviors, but we're really worried about getting the outcomes that we're looking for. When behaviors and results are related, then we don't need to look at behaviors. All we have to do is look at the results and know that there's a really tight link with every behavior that they do is directly linked to a result of some sort. And we definitely want to use this when we want to see consistent improvement in results over time, because that way we have metrics that we can use to assess fairly regularly. Lastly, you use a results-based approach when it kind of doesn't matter the process you use to get to the end result, right? In some circumstances, like in manufacturing, there's only one way to do a particular job. Usually only one way to do a particular job. There's a particular process that we need to do for efficiency, for safety reasons, all that sort of stuff. But not in other jobs. And so in other jobs, when it kind of doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you get it done, and it's done to the specifications that we set up, then I let you go and you can do your own thing, whatever process it is, just as long as the outcome is what I'm looking for. Why do managers hate appraisals? Largely because they feel like they don't have time to do it. Well, the point is, you do have the time. It's just that you shouldn't wait till the 12th hour right before your employees are ready to get their appraisal to suddenly sit down and write and try to rethink about everything that happened over the past year with your employees. This is something you should be documenting on a regular basis, whether it's a weekly basis or a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. You have to decide for yourself and for your employees what is the most important time frame for you to be regularly documenting these things. So the easy answer to, well, I don't have time, is that, well, if you spread the time out over the year, all you have to do is go to your file right before the appraisal time and say, okay, they had some problems early on with these issues, but I'm seeing some improvements over time, and I think that's a good thing. And so you use your time better, manage your time better so that you can actually have the time for it. Another problem, and this is an issue for the human resource management function, is you've got to train people on how to do performance appraisals. It's kind of what I'm trying to do in this class, is teaching you how to think about appraisals and how to give the feedback and those sorts of things. You've got to train people. So that's HR's job. HR's job is to train you on what your system looks like and how to do it and give the feedback as best as you can. The next problem with why managers hate appraisals is because they don't see the value in it. And it's possible that the company doesn't value performance appraisal. They don't give raises or performance feedback or training. And when they don't give that stuff, that creates the problem for us, right? So if you don't see any value in it, there's no need to do it. If the company doesn't value it, the employees won't do it. So first of all, it has to start at the top. The top management team needs to be able to demonstrate, this is why it's important. This is why we're going to do this. And they need to hold people accountable for it. If the top management team in HR doesn't hold people accountable, no one's going to do it. The next problem of why they hate appraisals is because they're afraid to do the assessments. Giving people feedback is a really emotional experience, and some people really don't feel comfortable with that. Some people can turn it on and turn it off. They can be very direct and give appropriate feedback and then take that step back and really work with providing support for their employees. But a lot of times managers, the reactions that they have are some of fear, or they are afraid of how the employees are going to react to them, or that the employees aren't going to like them anymore, or they're not going to be everybody's friend. And you might say to yourself, oh, I'd never do that. But you don't know until you're faced with that circumstance of having to evaluate people that you've worked with every day and actually have to give somebody a bad appraisal. It really takes good training and a good mindset to be able to do that appropriately. Another problem with why people hate appraisals is because they're so prone to biases that it makes them flawed. We tend to engage in things like that halo or horn bias, where if someone does something good, we assume everything they do is good, or if they do something bad, we assume everything they do is bad. We also may have problems with central tendency, bias where we tend to say everybody's average and everybody gets a 3 out of 5. Nobody gets a 4, nobody gets a 2, everybody's average. And we run into problems then. I mean, think about this logically. If everybody's average, supposedly, then your really good performers, are looking at a circumstance and they know that they're a better performer than somebody else, but they are not getting rewarded for it because their performance is not being differentiated from the poor performers. If everybody's lumped in the middle, then there's no incentive for anyone to behave better, because why should they? There's no chance of them getting a better score no matter how hard they perform, because they're always going to be told they're average. And it's the same thing for poor performers. There's no incentive for them to get better because they're getting evaluated the same as the really good performers. So why bother? And it's the same problem with leniency and strictness. There are some managers that are like, oh, I want to be nice to everybody. Everybody's going to get a 4 out of 4 or 5 out of 5. And so they're really lenient, and it sort of demoralizes the good performers because poor performers are being evaluated in the same way they are. And alternatively, with the strictness bias, and it's where everybody's like, no one's getting a good score from me. They have to be really outstanding to get it. And there's no system set up in place to really demonstrate that good performers are going to get a good eval and bad performers will get a bad eval. You have to be able to differentiate performance, and you have to have a performance management system that can differentiate good performers from poor performers. So when you engage in either central tendency or leniency and strictness, all you're doing is lumping people together in a category, demoralizing your good performers and rewarding bad performers for not trying hard, and they don't have to worry about it because they're always going to get the same eval as everybody else. So you really need to create a system that does differentiate between poor and good performers, and not let yourself fall victim to that, everybody's average or everybody's bad or everybody's good bias. Contrast effects are also something to consider. Where when you're looking at employees, it's a natural tendency to evaluate them against each other, even if we don't have an appraisal system that evaluates people against each other. I have employee A comes in and they are so outstanding, and I'm writing up their evaluation and I'm like, you're just the best thing since sliced bread. I'm so happy to have you as an employee. And then the next employee comes in and they're pretty good. They're average. They get the job done. They don't go above and beyond, but not every employee does. But they get their job done every day. They go home at 5 o'clock and they've done a good day's work. You run into a problem when you start to contrast them, because you look at that average employee who does a pretty good job and you start to think that they're a really bad employee. So you start to get this creep where you expect everybody to be outstanding, and not everybody is going to be outstanding. It's just not going to happen. So you want to make sure that you are fairly assessing people against the standards in a fair manner, and that's the goal. So be mindful of that when you're setting up your systems, to think about that. You also have issues with similar to me bias, right? Where, you like somebody, your friends maybe outside of work, or you went to a similar school. And so you might have this similar to me bias. Oh, you're really cool because you're like me, so therefore I'm going to give you a good eval. And that sort of leaves people who are different from you on the outskirts, so they're not going to get appropriate feedback. So we want to make sure that when we're evaluating someone, that it's not based on the fact that I just happen to like them a lot, because they're a lot like me, right? Or I see myself in them. You want to be able to give them better feedback that's appropriate to them and specific to them. The last bias that we should consider is primacy and recency. Primacy is, I start my year, and in the first couple of months of the job, you struggled a little bit. You had a hard time with performance. And it doesn't matter how much you improved over the year. The only thing I remember is those first few months where you struggled, and that's the evaluation you get. It sort of negates everything you did after those last few months. And the opposite can occur, right? You could have a good couple of first months, and then you have your performance slide, and then you get this really good appraisal even though your performance slid. That's not a fair appraisal either, and it'll come back to hurt the company later on. Recency is where, I forget everything else you did and I only remember the last thing that happens, like right before the appraisal is due. And let's say you had an awesome year, but, right before the end of the year, you lost a really big client and had nothing to do with anything you did, but your boss might look at it and go, horrible performance because you lost that big client, and you forget that you still had record sales numbers for the year, right? So it's really important that when we are doing our appraisal that we don't let ourselves get biased by either the first things that happened in the year, the primacy issue, or the last thing that happened in that year, but that we're fairly evaluating over the course of the year the variety of tasks that we saw someone engage in. We look at trends. We try to evaluate trends. How do we manage that? Well, it goes back to the comments I made about no time, right? Sure, you have time, but you have to monitor performance on a regular basis and take notes on your employees on a regular basis over the period of time of that year. And if you are documenting things as they come up, good and not so good stuff, for the year, that makes it a lot easier for you to be able to do that appraisal at the end of the year, because you have all the data in front of you and you can look at the trends and you can look at the challenges and you can look at the improvements or the degradation of performance and be able to make the appropriate assessment. So what we can do in class is talk about what else. What are your experiences in terms of good or bad performance, or in a discussion board. If this is an online class, we can do that as well. How do we improve overall in the performance appraisal process? Well, we want to make sure that we're not looking at large groups of job activities, but addressing single job activities. And this way we can focus on a specific job activity and address that specifically, as opposed to trying to manage multiple activities that go off in different directions. And that can be very confusing. So address a single issue at a time. Work on dimension by dimension ratings, right? So I'm going to look at one dimension, the next dimension, the next dimension, and then I sum them up for my overall rating. And we do this because the last thing we want to deal with is to try to guess someone's overall performance when it's a very complex, multidimensional type of job. The more complex the jobs, the more important it is for us to make sure we focus on dimension by dimension issues. Next, observing on the job behaviors on a regular basis. That goes back to the point about not having enough time. If you're walking around, if you're talking with your employees and you're engaged with them, you should be observing their behaviors. You should be talking to them about stuff. You should be giving them regular feedback about what they're doing and why. And so you need to observe this and document this. You also want to be careful of not using the word average, because average moves you towards the central tendency bias. Oh, everybody's average. Oh. Don't think about what average is. Think about, how does that person compare to the standard? That's the goal you want to hit. You want to make sure we're evaluating smaller groups of people rather than larger groups, because larger groups can feel very overwhelming. So break your appraisals down into smaller groups. Makes it easier to manage. So if you've got a small handful of people, deal with them first, deal with another group, but don't try to deal with, lots of employees all at once. It's going to be a lot harder to be able to do those evals properly. Lastly, it's HR's job to make sure you are trained on the biases and trained on what it means. What does good behavior, good performance look like? We should be able to look at it and say, yes, that's good performance. That's what I'm looking for. And look at something else and go, no, that's not quite right. Here's what's missing. So being able to train people how to do appraisals, how to assess performance, and how to be able to give that feedback is a big part of that.